Hello again, my mental snack food craving friends. This is Devin bringing you another mental tidbit for your delight. Today's topic is the history of God, and what we're going to do is go back and look at 10 different periods of time and see what the prevailing view of God was in each of those frames, each of those time periods. Now, since we're kind of dealing with a little bit of history, I want everyone to understand that the historical facts and elements that are in this may not necessarily be historically accurate. It's because they're not meant to be. This isn't a history lesson. This is about God in each of those time periods. So if the specific elements of history aren't exactly accurate, that's why. So just so we're all on the same page. So here are the 10 time periods that we're going to look at. As everything else, we're going to deal with them in a straightforward fashion, progressing one after the other. And thus, of course, we begin with number 1. To begin, we need to look way back in time, to a time before defined human civilizations, and thus we enter the time of pre-civilizations. Before the time of civilization itself, the people lived a more nomadic life, moving as needed to find and maintain their supply of food. During this time, there was no concept or idea of God. The people generally only dealt with those things they could physically understand. The people understood that children came from their parents, who also came from their own parents. And as a result, the people focused their attention on these people, those from whom they were given life. For this great act, the ancestors were seen as the creators of all things. Everything, after all, came from them. All their knowledge of where to find food and water came from those who came before. The knowledge of how to build or secure shelter came from them. In fact, all the things they needed to survive came directly from the ancestors. Thus, they were seen as the main reason for their ability to survive. Understand, during this time, there was little time to contemplate life. It was all about survival, nothing else. As a result, the people put all their attention to surviving, not understanding. They worshiped the ancestors because they were the ones that they see as directly giving them life and the ability to survive, nothing more. Ancestor worship was the dominant belief of the day because it was based on the simple observation that we are the product of our parents. Note also, in that time, there was no knowledge that wasn't directly gleaned by the current or past people of the tribe. So, in that regard, it was easy to attribute everything to the ancestors. That marks the end of the first age, and now we move forward. Over time, the people began to learn to harness the land instead of just foraging off of it. Thus, we enter the time of ancient peoples. With the advent of some basic farming skills, the people didn't need to spend all their time just to survive. Because of those basic farming skills they developed, they could spend more time in one general area. And that single new development allowed them to have the time needed to start doing other things. For the first time in human history, the people had time to contemplate their existence. Life was still geared around survival. It was just that now there was time to think about newer ways of doing things. This then also allowed time for people to begin studying the plants and animals that were around them. Everything that people were about was still based on what they could see, feel, smell, taste, and touch. Nothing in their world was outside of their physical senses. However, with their new knowledge and understanding of the plants and animals around them, for the first time in history, it allowed the people to also begin to specialize. Some people became farmers, while others continued to be hunters and gatherers. However, there also started to be people who simply understood more about the plants and animals than the others. These were people who either had more time to study or a natural aptitude for that type of learning and discovery. As time went on, these rare few became more important to the people. At one point, it was realized that these special few made the people's ability to survive much better. And it was also discovered that it took a great deal of time and effort to make the discoveries that these special people were in the process of making. It was soon realized that for their best chance of survival, these special people needed time to do their work. Time they didn't have if they needed to tend to their own basic needs. So the people decided to provide for them instead, thus freeing up their time to spend it helping the people. And thus were born the first medicine people in history. Over time, their specialized knowledge grew and their discoveries began to benefit the people greatly. The people learnt better ways to grow their crops, new ways to store food, and had better odds of survival because of the medicines now available. For a very long time, this was actually a beneficial relationship. The medicine people helped the other people and the people supported them. However, like all things, when times were good and there was less need for them, people began to question their need to support the medicine people. By this time, the specialized medicine people would have been unable to fend for themselves. They needed the people to provide them with food, tools, clothing, and whatnot. They no longer knew how to provide these things for themselves, and thus the idea that they weren't needed would have been truly terrifying for these special people. So terrifying, in fact, that the medicine people would likely have horrifying visions of being eaten by unknown creatures hidden in the darkness. However, they wouldn't have understood that this was imagination. Their world was based on their senses only. Thus, they take those dreams to be bad omens. Upon sharing these dark omens with the people, it would have made them incredibly fearful too, and thus the people would naturally turn to the medicine people and their knowledge to find a way to rid them of these terrible omens. Thus the medicine people, for the first time, began to look beyond the mere physical world. It became imperative that the medicine people work to find ways to protect the other people from these dark creatures that were now looming. And thus the medicine people were transformed into shaman. No one, of course, realizing that the fears weren't real, that they were simply the fear of the unknown. The shaman, of course, were now seen in an entirely new light. Their role became critical for survival. Without them, the people were at risk of getting diseases that the shaman could heal, as well as at risk of attack from dark creatures that would now hunt them in the night or when they were unaware. And that concludes part 1, so we'll see you again in part 2. See you there!